Ladies and gentlemen, if I would be a British or an American, I would feel forced to start with some funny joke or some anecdote or some witty quote. One of the jokes would be, of course I have to admit, it's a rather shallow joke, that I didn't know that Robert Schumann spoke so well Hebrew. But well, thanks God, I don't have to use the jokes because I'm just a stubborn and boring German. So I pick up one of the most beloved but also most cruel German habits, and that is to start with some preliminary remarks. First, I'm extremely happy that we, the Center for the Study of European Politics and Society at the BGU and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung are hosting this conference. Again, a common project that we do together. We as the Stiftung have a lot of partners. This is the method of our German-Israeli endeavor, but there is no other partner with whom we have such an intense cooperation. Dear Dean Professor Newman, dear Sharon, dear Hila, and all the team. For us, this is a cooperation full of trust, of deep understanding, and I pick up your word, David, common values and a common mission that we actually have. Let me use this opportunity to once again express my gratitude for your support and your friendship for such a long time. Second, I already revealed the secret that I'm just a boring German. In this regard, it might be suitable to use the most boring first sentence you could ever imagine for a presentation. And this is to begin with the statement that we could not be more actual. That we could not have placed this event more timely. But may it be boring, it's nonetheless true. And it is true in a rather cruel and very tragic way in the moment. Those hundreds who've drowned in the Mediterranean Sea recently, and the continuous effort of the populists throughout Europe, in a way related to these events, using the despicable metaphor, the boat is full, enough is enough, sheds some light, and not the best light, on the situation of immigrants and ethnic minorities in Europe. The great Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard said 150 years ago, "Shall we then judge a country by the majority or by the minority?" By the minority, surely, that was his answer. In the end, the quality of a democracy, of a society that is based on clear values, can only be judged properly by really looking at the way the minorities are being treated by the majorities. One should combine Kierkegaard's wise quote with the words of another still living and still very influential French-Jewish philosopher, Henri Bernard Lévy, who clearly said, "Europe is not just a geographical entity, but foremost an idea." This quote not only clarifies that Israel will always, among others, be part of Europe, despite the fact that it is not a member of the European Union. We should not forget that in the ancient mythology, Europe was the daughter of a Phoenician king, and that god Zeus abducted her, turning into a white bull at a beach which supposedly, according to the saga, is not much more than 300 kilometers away from here. Nobody can seriously separate this world region, but especially Israel as the only functioning democracy in this vicinity, from Europe. This quote also kind of shows, the quote of Lévy, shows the conviction since the time of great Europeans like Konrad Adenauer, Jean Monnet, Robert Schumann, and others, that Europe constitutes not only a more or less successful free trade area, but also a community of shared values. As a consequence, basic laws and principles, but also the jurisdiction, should reflect those clear values. Well, every law student knows that laws and rules are one thing, but the will to follow the rules, the compliance of the so-called ordinary citizen, is something fully different. Without some amount of identification with the nation, or in the case of Europe, with the European project, there will be no real commitment to stay with the rules. In the combination of the two quotes, Kierkegaard and Henri Lévy, it is obvious that the contribution of the minorities into the European integration is not only significant and fundamental in the historical perspective. In times of crisis, in times of unrest, also within the borders of what we call Europe, the role and situation of the minorities is something like a litmus test for the finality of this project. How can the whole idea of the European integration project prevail without reflecting the diversity of the European Union? How can it prevail without granting equal rights to everybody who lives within its borders? We will never even come near to what one could call a common European identity if we fail to deal with minorities. I think that is a very important statement. The story of the refugees stranded in Lampedusa and elsewhere also shows that a European identity, I hope that it is not broken now, because it's of course a Konrad Adenauer phone, this is why I'm So we in Germany had for, as I said, a European identity will never be a static kind of concept. It will change because Europe is constantly changing. We in Germany had for decades the wrong impression that immigrants would come, would work some years in Germany, and then return to their home countries. This wrong assumption did prevent us from systematic efforts to fully integrate those so-called guest workers, which is already a highly disputable term. We in the whole of Europe should not repeat this mistake and should take every effort to really offer those who are already in Europe the chance to find a new home in this so-called old continent. Our first two speakers will show how much immigrants did change the face of Europe in the truest sense of the word. Allow me to thus extend a very warm Baruch haba to Mrs. Katharina Senge. She will exemplify how much especially Muslim immigrants, mostly from Turkey, already changed the national identity of Germany. I'm not only happy that she is contributing to this conference because she's an outstanding expert on immigration and integration issues, but I'm also happy to host her in Israel because we worked for several years together in the research department in Berlin. Concerning the second panel, which I will have the honor to moderate, we picked some very significant examples that could also serve as some kind of water level report on the status of human rights and minority rights in the European Union. I have to tell you the very personal story that we as the Adenauer Stiftung just granted a scholarship to an Israeli researcher, a young guy who is analyzing what he did call the double marginalization, the treatment of Roma children's rights by the European Court of Human Rights. And I can share with you how alarmed I've been by the information that has been revealed by this young man. It makes some difference if people are discriminated by other people in daily life, which is worse enough, or if they are treated in a discriminatory way by institutions. I think this is a very important thing. The first is to be prevented by laws and rules. The second is a clear sign of destitution for every state or state-like body. In the case of the Roma children, the latter is true, I fear. The second showcase is the case of Muslim integration in Europe. We know that Muslim integration is one of the most contentious issues in the immigration debate in Europe, a debate that gets right to the heart of public anxieties about immigration. Getting the balance right between, on the one hand, accommodating Muslim minorities while in the same time upholding national and cultural values might be one of the biggest challenges that we have to deal with. My impression, which might be the typical German institutional kind of approach, is that one of the biggest problems that we are facing is the high diversity of the Muslim minority in itself. Whom to talk to in order to ease the situation and to find solutions? You don't know. Allow me just two final sentences concerning the question of populism. In my former job in the Stiftung, being the head of the research department in the foundation, we published a very extensive study on the rise of populism, including some recommendations. And I have to say that our first and most important recommendation, especially to the conservative side of the political spectrum, was not to fight populism by somehow copying their contents and their methods. All evidence clearly shows that this leads to simply nothing, if not to the worse, not birth. Just to please you, Mr. Dean, dear David, I will end by quoting not a French or Danish, but a British philosopher and author. It is the great Bertrand Russell, which I personally like very, very much. He said, "For the societal progress, we have to rely on minorities, because majorities tend to just consolidate what already exists." I would simply add both is important: to consolidate, in this case, the existing European Union as an important player in the world and a really amazing project since decades, and to build the future Europe by granting the minorities the attention and the rights that they really deserve. I wish all of us a fruitful conference and Mazal Tov to this amazing Europe Day.